Hi, I'm David Chapman, and I'll be your instructor for the real estate practice course. Wanted to say a couple things about Chapter 1. In Chapter 1, it's not a long chapter, but there are a couple of things in there that are pretty important. The chapter differentiates between tangible and intangible. Tangible being raw land, tangible being the structures, roads, things like that. And then intangible are non-physical assets such as stocks, bonds, mortgages, and leases. Okay, so hopefully you can get those things. It also, this book, a little bit different than the principles book, establishes real estate in three different ways. The first way it does it is a tangible asset, just like we got through talking about the raw land and the buildings and things like that. Secondly, it talks about real estate as a bundle of rights. If you remember back to principles, when we talked about that bundle of rights, we categorized those rights into exclusive possession, use and enjoyment, disposition, and then you can unbundle these bundles, and then that determines the type of ownership that you have. The third way that it does, so the first way is the tangible asset, the second way the bundle of rights, and then the third way is it talks about it as an industry or a profession. And so when we talk about real estate as a profession, we can talk about the different things that you can do to make a living in real estate. You've got brokerage, whether it's commercial or residential brokerage. You've got development, where you take land and you develop it into either retail, commercial, office, industrial, residential, mixed use, and that sort of thing. And then you have leasing activity, where you would go out and you would find buildings for people that want to lease it, or you could list a property for somebody who wants to lease it. And that would be a role of property management, which is taking care, looking after, having a fiduciary obligation for the property for an owner. That kind of leads into asset management, which managing the property is an asset. So usually you're managing vehicles, you're managing the property, and sometimes managing cash for owners in that situation. Then there's real estate law. You go to law school and you could focus on the real estate law process. Appraisal, which is valuation of assets, real estate assets. So that's a great way to make a living, and we have a full appraisal class here at the University of Central Oklahoma. Market consulting, working with companies to determine highest and best use for a property. Consulting opportunities like that exist. Planning, there's a lot of planning activity that takes place in the municipality. I'm a Ward 1 city councilman, and we do a lot of planning activity for the city of Edmond. Government relation and taxation, assessment of property values, all these kinds of things fit under the real estate category. Housing assistance, we have a full, the Oklahoma Housing Finance Authority has a group called Section 8 that does housing affordability studies, housing affordability assistance, and that sort of thing. Then you have the whole category of lending, finance, mortgage finance, all different kinds of lending activity for real estate construction, long-term financing for homes, that sort of thing. And then investors, investment management, those that would invest into real estate assets. So those are the three ways that we look at real estate in this book. We look at it as a tangible asset, we look at it as a bundle of rights, and then we look at it as a profession or an industry. Real estate is really important to the economy. Half of the world's wealth is tied up in real estate, generates over 25% of the U.S. domestic gross product. And housing alone accounts for almost 17 to 18% of that gross domestic product. So it's a very important category. Creates nearly 9 million jobs for Americans in the United States and generates nearly 70% of all local government tax revenue. So it plays a huge role in the success of our economy. When you look at land uses, it's pretty interesting to see land use. Only about 6% of land in the United States is actually developed, which leaves a great opportunity for us as real estate developers. The most that's the most land that's in use currently is a chart in your book shows that developed land, water areas, crop land, pastures, range land, forest land, and it shows it by the number of acres in which it's used. So that's an interesting thing to look at. By percentage, developed land is only 6%, like we said. Water area is 23%. Cropland, 19%. Pasture land, rangeland is 6%. Forest land is 21%. So that kind of gives you an idea of what the land use is. If you look at the amount of money in the United States and the amount of money invested, the largest investment is corporate equities at 35.7%. Real estate is second. Real estate is 30.8%. U.S. Treasury securities is at 15.1%. Mortgage debt, 13.8%. Corporate and foreign bonds at 11.7%. And mutual securities is at 3.7%. Look at household wealth. Household owned housing worth $22 trillion. Within that, there's $12.5 trillion in equity, which means that's the value over what's owed on the property. So that's really important. When you start looking at people's wealth, it's mostly tied up in housing. At the end of this chapter, they differentiate between property space versus property versus capital markets. They talk about the user market, markets for physical real estate space. Buyers receive the right to use that space. It's called the space or market or rental market, where rental rates are determined. This is how much we pay for space. These markets are local, very competitive. We have separate local market types within this: retail, office, industrial. Then we have the user market, supply and demand. On the demand side, we have individuals, households, and firms that require space. On the supply side, those providing that space are real estate owners, operators, and those who operate buildings. So we separate or segment between user and space markets. Both demand and supply side of the user markets are very specific, and they compared to nationally integrated markets, gasoline, steel. It's highly segmented. That's sort of an overview of Chapter 1. Thank you for your attention.